Hey Carlos, how irritating is it to miss out on Q-Love this circuit, but I also know how tough it is to overtake. What do you think is feasible tomorrow?
No, it was very tough out there today. It was a very fine line between good balance and bad balance, and today we definitely struggled a lot. But tomorrow in the race, I think we're one of the strongest, if not the strongest, midfield cars, so see what we can do.
He arrived as a hero from Baku. He left disqualified, frustrated, and brutally honest. Carlos Sainz didn't lose Singapore because of speed, he lost it because of trust. These are the shocking statements from Carlos Sainz after a chaotic Singapore qualifying, the moment that exposed both Williams and Formula One's harshest truth: precision isn't optional. For Carlos Sainz, every Formula One weekend begins long before the lights go out. His preparation is a ritual, quiet, methodical, almost obsessive. In the build-up to Singapore, that discipline was sharper than ever. The podium in Baku hadn't inflated his ego, it had recalibrated his expectations. "One result doesn't change who I am," he told Sky Sports calmly. But it had changed something else: how the paddock viewed him. No longer just the reliable veteran, Sainz had become the cornerstone of Williams' resurgence. In a team built on data, he had become the emotion. The one who reminded engineers that racing isn't numbers, it's intuition. That's the paradox of Sainz: analytical yet emotional, technical yet instinctive. He doesn't race to prove people wrong anymore. He races to prove control is still possible in a sport defined by chaos. Heading into Marina Bay, Sainz's focus was simple: repeat the execution, not the emotion. He knew the FW47 wasn't designed for circuits like this. It was too drag efficient, too stiff, too polite in the corners. But Sainz isn't a driver who hides behind limitations. "The car has weaknesses, but I have tools," he told his race engineer during the Thursday briefing. He meant it. Every lap in Singapore would demand precision: braking early, managing temperature spikes, avoiding wheel spin on traction zones. He approached it like a chess match. While others prepared to fight the track, Sainz prepared to outthink it. His calm demeanor wasn't lack of passion, it was focus refined by experience. To him, qualifying isn't about courage, it's about calculation. And that's why this weekend, more than any other, cut so deep. Because he had done everything right until everything went wrong. Inside Williams, Sainz's arrival had redefined culture. He didn't need to be loud to lead. He led by pattern. Every debrief ended the same way, not with complaints, but with questions. Where did we lose efficiency? Why did the balance shift? His analytical precision reminded veterans of his father's rallying discipline: measured, calm, exact. And yet, there was empathy in his leadership. Engineers described him as the only driver who listens as much as he speaks. That attitude had turned him into the emotional center of the team. He wasn't just driving the car, he was driving a transformation. The atmosphere in the Singapore garage was different because of him: quieter, more confident, less desperate. Williams hadn't felt that kind of stability in years. And it's ironic, because just 24 hours later, that stability would be shattered by a detail smaller than a fingertip. In every great driver, there's a moment when self-awareness replaces youthful arrogance. Sainz reached that point long ago. Gone was the frustration that once burned through his Ferrari years, the constant comparisons, the political battles, the need to prove value. At Williams, he had found something purer: autonomy. He was no longer the man trying to prove he belonged, he was the man helping others believe they did. "I enjoy the challenge," he said on Friday, "because here, mistakes still teach us something." That quote captured everything about his mindset. In a team fighting for relevance, he'd learned to measure success not by trophies, but by growth. And in Singapore, that growth would be tested not through pace, but through patience. Because when the system fails you, the only thing left to measure is how you respond. The pressure before qualifying wasn't visible, but it was heavy. The engineers knew how fragile their setup window was, Sainz knew it better. "This track doesn't forgive balance issues," he warned during FP3. He wasn't being dramatic, he was being prophetic. The car's narrow operational range made it a nightmare to adapt. 1 degree of tire temperature, 1 click of rear wing, and the whole equation fell apart. But Sainz didn't panic. He adapted his style lap by lap, braking earlier, modulating throttle, trusting muscle memory. Watching on board, you could see it, his hands calm, his input smooth, his control absolute. He didn't need chaos to show brilliance. He needed stillness. And that stillness made the eventual collapse all the more tragic. It wasn't carelessness that doomed his weekend. It was faith in his car, in his team, in a system that couldn't hold under pressure. The true brilliance of Sainz lies not in his speed, but in his awareness. He doesn't drive with emotion, he drives with understanding. When he sat down with his engineers before qualifying, he wasn't talking about lap time, he was talking about thermal windows and aerodynamic load shifts. That's the mark of a complete driver. The difference between 10th and 5th here isn't talent, he told his team. It's the preparation before the lap starts. That philosophy defined his weekend. He knew success wouldn't come from magic, it would come from method. And yet, that same faith in process became the very thing that hurt him most. Because when the DRS failure was revealed, when the disqualification hit, Sainz realized that he had done everything right in a system that had failed him. Singapore didn't expose his weakness. It exposed Formula One's brutal truth: perfection is never enough. Friday in Singapore began with the kind of optimism that teams like Williams rarely afford themselves. The garage was calm, the engineers focused, the air thick with humidity but also with quiet hope. The FW47 looked composed from the first laps. On the medium compound, Sainz found rhythm instantly, smooth entries, controlled traction, predictable braking. The telemetry confirmed what his hands already knew: the car had balance. It's responsive, he said after FP1, that slight lift in tone that tells you a driver is at ease. In a field where Williams often fights to stay in Q2, Carlos was comfortably within the top 8. That position wasn't extraordinary for others, but for a team rebuilding its identity, it felt like progress. Singapore's opening day didn't just show promise. It offered something far more dangerous: belief. Behind the garage screens, the engineers studied every frame of data like a puzzle. The FW47 had shown rare consistency through the technical sector, the one area Williams had historically struggled with most. The key was Sainz's precision. He wasn't chasing apex speed, he was chasing predictability. Through turns 8 and 13, the car behaved like an obedient instrument. Front tires are stable, rotation is good, he radioed. For a moment, the engineers allowed themselves to exhale. That kind of feedback had been missing for months. But even then, a faint unease lingered. The balance that looked perfect on mediums started to unravel the moment they switched to soft tires. The same pattern that had haunted Williams all season began to return: a car that worked beautifully in theory but failed to translate its potential when the grip window shifted. The ghost of inconsistency had followed them to Singapore. In FP2, the picture became clearer and crueler. Sainz ended the session 8th again, but his tone had changed. "The car is okay," he said, "but I can't attack." That sentence, quiet and clinical, revealed the truth. Williams' stability came at the cost of sharpness. On paper, the FW47 was balanced; in practice, it was sedated. Sainz could drive it quickly, but not aggressively, and on a circuit like Marina Bay, aggression is mandatory. The engineers adjusted rear ride height, softened the front anti-roll bar, even modified the brake migration curve to help rotation. Nothing unlocked the final 10th. "The rear is lazy," Sainz said over the radio. That's the phrase drivers use when their car feels disconnected, slow to react, slow to obey. A lazy car might survive a race. It doesn't survive qualifying. By Saturday morning, the optimism of Friday had turned into quiet caution. Sainz still believed the car could make Q3, but he could feel the setup's fragility. "If the track evolves, we'll be chasing it," he told his race engineer. That line wasn't guesswork. It was experience. In Singapore, track temperature drops quickly at night, changing how the tires bite into the asphalt. Williams' car, with its narrow operating window, was always one step behind those changes. The engineers knew it. Sainz knew it. And yet, hope persisted, because hope always does in racing. The car was stable enough to be competitive, and in Formula One, sometimes stable is mistaken for ready. The problem is, Singapore doesn't forgive illusions. The same qualities that made the FW47 predictable on Friday would make it stubborn when the pressure arrived. When qualifying simulation runs began, the warning signs became impossible to ignore. The soft tires refused to wake up. The temperature delta between the front and rear axle widened by nearly 4 degrees Celsius, catastrophic in Formula 1 terms. The car understeered into slow corners, then snapped on throttle exit, a contradiction no setup can fix. "I lose the front in entry and the rear in traction," Sainz reported. That's the driver's way of saying, the car doesn't understand itself. It's an engineer's nightmare and a driver's prison. From the pit wall, team principal James Vowles watched in silence. The car that had looked composed 24 hours earlier now looked confused. But the cruel part was this: Sainz still drove it beautifully. His smoothness masked the chaos beneath. To anyone watching from the outside, Williams looked solid. Only Carlos knew how close it was to falling apart. When FP3 ended, the garage atmosphere shifted from quiet confidence to cautious realism. The numbers didn't lie. On mediums, Williams were a top 8 car. On softs, they were bottom 5. The engineers debated whether to gamble on tire prep, to run longer warm-up laps, or to risk a setup change before qualifying. Sainz listened, then said something that summed up his entire philosophy: let's not complicate it. If we're clean, we'll get there. That belief in simplicity, in execution, was what defined him. He knew the car was unpredictable, but he trusted his ability to extract order from chaos. What he didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that the weekend's real problem wouldn't be mechanical or strategic. It would be structural. A 0.6 of a millimeter mistake buried deep in the DRS mechanism that would erase everything he'd built. Singapore hadn't finished with him yet. The sun had barely set when the pressure began to rise. Singapore's air was thick, heavy, and unrelenting, the kind of atmosphere that makes every breath inside the cockpit feel slower, every heartbeat louder. As Q1 began, Carlos Sainz was calm. His first laps were measured, cautious, deliberate. "We'll build into it," he told the team, the voice of experience rather than fear. The FW47 was stable enough, its rhythm intact. But underneath that composure, something subtle was missing. The rear of the car felt disconnected, not dangerous, but untrustworthy. He could still place it where he wanted, but he didn't know if it would stay there. In qualifying, that uncertainty is poison. You can't fight a car that lies to you in microseconds. And yet, Sainz did what he always does: he turned uncertainty into control, at least for a while. Q1 ended without drama. 12th fastest. Solid. Predictable. The lap looked tidy, the car obedient. On the monitors, the engineers nodded, the process was working. But Sainz's tone on the radio was different. "Grip is inconsistent," he said. "We're losing temperature on the rears." That phrase, simple but ominous, marked the beginning of the spiral. In Singapore, rear temperature defines confidence. Too cold, and the car slides; too hot, and traction disintegrates. The FW47's balance shifted between those two extremes with every sector. Williams tried to stabilize the issue with tire pressures, but it was a losing battle. Sainz could feel it. He's the kind of driver who doesn't need numbers to know what's wrong, his hands tell him before the sensors do. And when he lined up for Q2, he already knew what the data would confirm later: the car had lost its rhythm. The first Q2 run was clean, but sterile. The car moved exactly where he pointed it, yet there was no sensation of grip, no connection. "Rear's gone," he said mid-lap, voice flat. It wasn't panic, it was awareness. He finished the run 13th, 300ths behind Albon. A blink. A breath. But in Formula 1, that's the difference between progress and purgatory. The engineers debated whether to push for another lap, but Sainz decided quickly. "We go again," he said. He didn't need to ask for changes. He knew the problem wasn't setup, it was the car's fundamental nature. Williams's FW47 was like a machine built to tease hope, not deliver it. On circuits that reward aggression, it refused to be provoked. Sainz adjusted everything he could: brake bias forward, traction map smoother, corner entries wider. He was driving not for speed, but for survival. The second run began with promise. The first sector was sharp, precise. "That's better," Lambiasi, his engineer, encouraged. But by the second sector, the car's weakness returned. Turn 10, slow left, traction zone. The rear twitched mid-corner, and the correction cost him just enough momentum to lose a tenth. The exit of turn 13 finished the job: a small slide, a minor over-rotation, invisible to the naked eye but devastating to the stopwatch. Sainz crossed the line, silence on the radio for 3 long seconds before confirmation came: P13. Out. He exhaled slowly, a man processing disappointment not as emotion, but as data. "Understood," he said simply. His voice was flat, but not defeated. He had driven the lap as perfectly as the car allowed. And when perfection isn't enough, silence says more than anger ever could. As the Williams rolled back into the garage, the air inside felt heavier than the heat outside. Engineers stared at telemetry screens as if expecting numbers to change out of guilt. They didn't. The rear tires had dropped below optimal temperature by nearly 5 degrees in the final sector. No setup can recover from that. "It's not the balance, it's the window," said one of the engineers softly. Everyone knew what that meant: the car's temperature window was too narrow to handle Singapore's evolving surface. Sainz removed his glove slowly, the kind of movement that hides frustration behind control. "We made changes that didn't help," he admitted later. It wasn't a complaint, it was diagnosis. He had trusted the numbers. The numbers had lied. For the second time in a single evening, precision had failed the man who values it most. Outside, under the lights of Marina Bay, Sainz stood in front of the media with his arms crossed, jaw tense, eyes sharp but calm. "It wasn't the tires. I had no rear grip at all," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. This wasn't the voice of a driver making excuses, it was the voice of a man explaining a system error with the patience of an engineer. He didn't blame the team, nor did he hide his disappointment. "It's frustrating, because the potential was there," he added. Then came the pause, that long, silent moment that only veterans allow themselves before speaking again. "But that's racing." He said it softly, almost as a philosophy. Because for Carlos Sainz, racing isn't about losing or winning. It's about understanding. And that night, in the quiet between questions, he understood everything.